some impressions from you thus far about how you found the hypothetical.
Excellent, very good. I think very, very clear on the issues and demystifying this idea that is starting to be said around that men are equally victim and blah blah blah, and that they're going to be using on the family court reforms, and that's going to be a disaster for women in domestic violence. So I think it's really good to actually clarify these issues.
Thanks. And have you found anything particularly interesting this afternoon?
Well, I think I enjoyed listening to the New South Wales Police response, even though I somehow felt that that's how it should be. It's just very good to hear a police officer talk about that, because it's not often that the police have that same ability to put things the way they should be put. So I would like that to go out more, because I think police themselves need to take that on board.
So what have been in your impressions so far this afternoon?
I think it's pretty intelligent and wide-ranging discussion. I get concerned. There's two things that always make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up a little bit, though, and that's the talk of engaging men, and the notion that men should take responsibility. They've become very common in our language, I think, recently.
And what are the things that make the hairs on the back
why
of
does
the
it
neck
bother
stand?
me?
Yeah, why?
Well, I guess that's the thing I said last up before we had our coffee break. Men who are violent engage in criminal behaviour, and we shouldn't really treat them differently from other types of criminal behaviour. And so the engagement should be in the criminal justice system. Because it happens to be intimate partner violence, we tend to downplay it and treat it as a personal issue, or pathologise it, which is a problem. I think that social work and psychological professions really captured this whole area far too much. And the idea of men taking responsibility, well, it sounds like it's optional. That, again, we're saying, imagine if we said that to drug dealers. We run a big campaign to get drug dealers to take responsibility for their drug dealing behaviour. It just is a ludicrous notion, because they do it because it works. And it's almost saying, look, there's this special form of criminal behaviour that will be optional to take responsibility for, but things like drug dealing we're going to crack down on, the police will take very seriously. So,
Do you think that violence against women is in the same category?
Well, in some ways, dealing ecstasy tablets at a Oxford Street nightclub may not actually harm anyone, and some people might have a good time, and yet the police will take that very seriously. And yet women are getting broken bones and long-term injuries, and yet in some way we're saying, well, why don't we engage those men to take responsibility? It's a very worrying thought.
It's a very valid point that you made.
Yeah, so they're the two things that I get concerned about.
I think it's a really good forum to have the debate, and I'm really enjoying it. I guess some of the stuff I've really enjoyed today is, for instance, Danny talking about men ringing up as victims, but then when they unpack the story, it's a different story altogether, and I think sometimes things are dealt with only on a surface level, so I'm liking to see the things explored further.
And has there been anything this afternoon other than that that's struck you as quite innovative or remarkable about the discussion so far?
No, I guess it's much what I expected. I appreciate hearing about the research into the issues, but they're issues that I've thought about before, that there's not a lot of research out there about men as victims. I think it was a very good analogy, that's not the right word, but that men are victims more outside the home and women are victims more inside the home, and I think the feminist analysis is very appropriate around domestic violence.
Okay, I think the thing that's starting to strike me is that the hypothetical, the topic is men as victims, and I feel that we've moved quite quickly into saying there are no men as victims, and that one should be looking at men as perpetrators. The thing that really strikes me is that when the question was how do we engage men who are victims of domestic violence, one of the people on the panel said, well, we engage them through the criminal system. Another person has said, we need to get men to see how society has caused them to be perpetrators. Now, that may be the case, but if you accept that there is not a single male who is a victim, but if there's one male who is a victim, this would be a nice forum to say, well, what's happening here and how does one engage him, his partner, whatever. But it seems that that's no longer being considered by people. I would suspect that people's experiences have obviously guided that. And I just think if there was a male in the audience who was a victim, how many of the people on the panel would he then want to approach, feeling that he might get a sort of a non-judgmental view, as opposed to a view that's going to be, well, the chances are, or our assumption is, in fact, you're not a victim, you're a perpetrator. So I think it's a pity. It's all that, everything what people are saying would be fine under a normal domestic violence discussion thing, but I just think here we have an opportunity to try and be a bit more open on a topic, and not a topic of quantifiable equal to domestic violence towards females by any means. And I just think it's a pity. I think we're missing that opportunity.
Do you have ideas on how we could better address the issue that you raised this afternoon?
Well, I think a way to address it would be to constantly coming back and saying, yes, but if there is a victim, a male who is a victim and who is not a perpetrator, or if you feel that's not the case, keep your opinions sort of to yourself for the moment until we can explore if there are others who have got opinions. One of the things I find interesting in terms of methodology, people talk about asking men or services where they've had men contact and asking them what's going on. I find it interesting in my role where we've done some research asking women if they have been victims, and prior to that, if they have been a perpetrator. And we've got this incredibly surprising finding where you have twice as many women saying they've been a perpetrator towards their partner than their partner has been a perpetrator towards them. I don't know what it means. It's really surprising, but I kind of think that this is a kind of forum where you could say, how would one explore this further so that we get a better understanding, so that we can offer services to families that are going to be helpful. Yeah.
So perhaps some additional forums after today?
Additional forums is obviously one way to go, but not if it becomes an opportunity for people to applaud the idea of yes, let's say that men can't go out at night and women must be out of the home. Not if it's that kind of thing, because I don't think that's particularly helpful. It might be amusing. It might get a lot of support from a majority of an audience, where the majority of the audience will undoubtedly and understandably feel that the greatest harm is done by men, and that I don't dispute at all. But if we really want to say, but let's look at men as victims, then I think it needs to be a major shift, and I think it would take many forums and many people to eventually go, yeah, we need this major shift. It doesn't mean that you're anti domestic violence from a feminist perspective. If you say, I think actually there's a way of discussing this to understand what happens when men are victims, if you believe that men ever are victims.